DeAndre Hopkins to the Kansas City Chiefs. The NFL trade deadline is quickly approaching. We're going to take a look at some more potential trade targets for the Baltimore Ravens in this episode of the Flock Rundown.
Ravens Flock. The Flock Rundown is the place to be.
Motionless brainwaves attempt to swim their way to sense, can't tame the untamed.
Appreciate you, Ray. What's up, Ravens fans? My name is Ryan, and welcome back to another episode of the Flock Rundown. So DeAndre Hopkins is officially a Chief. That sucks, man. I definitely did not want that. Last week we made a trade video going over a couple of options, and DeAndre Hopkins was one option that made sense for the Ravens. Not that we necessarily need a receiver right now. We're definitely balling, but it's a nice security blanket if there were any receiver injuries and just having a go-to X guy that can go up and get the ball in jump ball situations and red zone situations. But now he's on Kansas City, so let's stop hyping it up. And we're going to move on to some more Baltimore trade targets that make sense from a cap standpoint, from a draft capital standpoint, from a scheme or player fit standpoint. So we'll start with a guy that I've mentioned before, but I still feel like makes a lot of sense, and he's already played in Baltimore, and that is Jadeveon Clowney. The Ravens could use a boost in pass rush. I know we brought in Yannick Ngakoue, and he's definitely a nice depth rotational guy, but we're just not getting enough from the top end. We're relying a little bit too much on Kyle Van Noy, who is producing. Odafe Oweh has been solid. He got off to a really quick start and then has been a little bit quieter over the last few weeks. He did get a sack last week, but I think we need a dominant edge guy, man. I think that would help the secondary out tremendously, and we'll talk about a potential secondary option as well. But bringing a guy like Jadeveon Clowney back into the Ravens organization, I think, is a perfect fit from a risk standpoint. You're not going to have to give up much draft capital at all. He does have a $10 million cap hit next year, but only $2 million of that is guaranteed. So you can easily give him a 1-year extension and move those numbers around, or you just trade for him for this season and then cut him. I think his dead cap hit's only $2 million, so it's not going to make or break us. I don't think that that's going to deter our entire decision making. And I think Clowney would obviously provide much needed pass rush help. He did it last year for us. He also sets the edge incredibly. So I think a guy like Clowney makes a lot of sense. Not that that is as attractive as going out and getting a Maxx Crosby or a Myles Garrett or someone of that caliber. I just don't see those teams letting those guys go, especially Myles Garrett, who's in our division. The Browns are not going to send him to the Baltimore Ravens. I don't even think the Browns are going to trade him. I've seen a lot of Maxx Crosby, and that's a dream scenario, man. I mean, I would love to have Maxx Crosby in a Ravens uniform. I'd give up 2 first-round picks to go get Maxx Crosby. I'm not even kidding. I think that transforms our defense entirely. With the strong interior rush that we already have and our ability to stop the run, a guy like Maxx Crosby on the edge is just going to open up everything and wreak havoc, and that helps the secondary out tremendous. So if Maxx Crosby's available, let's go get him. We haven't had a guy of that caliber since Terrell Suggs on the edge. We haven't had a game-wrecking pass rusher. And if we are able to go get a Maxx Crosby, let's do it, man. I just think that that's a little less likely because I don't think the Raiders are going to want to part with him. The Ravens would obviously have to mortgage a little bit of the future in the next few years and probably have to not re-sign or cut a few guys to be able to afford it. But I do think it's worth it. A guy that we have called on is Za'Darius Smith. So another pass rusher that is low risk in my mind. It's kind of similar to the Clowney. He's played for the Ravens before. His cap hit is under $10 million and not fully guaranteed. So we're easily able to release him and not absorb an enormous amount of dead money or just extend him for a year and move those numbers out. So I think Za'Darius Smith, Jadeveon Clowney are kind of in the same category. I would say Za'Darius Smith is less likely because, once again, he's on the Browns. Are the Browns trying to help out the Ravens? We don't see a lot of in-division trades in the AFC North. That's not normal. Patrick Queen in the offseason signing with the Steelers even, or Geno Stone signing with the Bengals was weird. But we definitely don't see trades. We sometimes see the free agent signings, but teams aren't willing to help out other teams in the division. So it would be a little surprising if the Browns did send Za'Darius Smith to the Ravens, but we have called, so we're obviously interested in that, and I think we're interested in bringing in a pass rusher. For one, it is the number one thing that can help out our secondary, and for another, we went and signed Yannick Ngakoue and brought him in and signed him to the active roster. We're calling about Za'Darius Smith. I mean, these are moves that shed light onto Eric DeCosta's mindset potentially. So I think those moves make the most sense for a pass rushing standpoint. If Crosby's not available, if we're not willing to give up that much, or the Raiders aren't willing to part with him, then guys like Clowney and Za'Darius Smith, I think, are low-risk options, and we could easily just have them as a rental this year. I don't think we're giving up much draft capital at all, probably a 5th-round pick or later. So those moves make a lot of sense for the Ravens and bolster the pass rush at the same time. If we're looking to add more to the secondary, and I don't think this necessarily is necessary for this season, we're pretty deep at corner, at safety, and I know we're not playing that well. You know, obviously we could be playing a lot better, but it's not a talent issue. It's not investment issue from a roster standpoint from Eric DeCosta. I mean, we're spending money in the secondary. Marcus Williams, huge deal. Kyle Hamilton, 1st-round pick. Nate Wiggins, 1st-round pick. Marlon Humphrey, 1st-round pick and huge deal. You know, Brandon Stevens is about to be up. So I really don't think we need to trade for a corner. I'd rather have a pass rusher. I think that helps both areas, you know what I mean? It helps the rush and then naturally helps the secondary as well. Just getting a corner doesn't really improve the pass rush. But if we are going to get a corner, I would go after Marshon Lattimore. I think that the Saints would be willing to part with him. He's obviously a great talent, and he comes at a really low cap hit this year, so we wouldn't really have to do anything. You know, I think he's only owed about $1 million for the rest of this season. And then the remaining years on his contract aren't fully guaranteed. So once again, we're able to get out of it without a ton of damage, or we extend him and keep him as our other corner and let a guy like Stevens hit free agency or something like that. Because obviously Wiggins is going to be here for a while. Marlon Humphrey is going to be here for another year at least, I would think. You know, he's playing too well for us to just cut him. I could see a restructure maybe next year, but I don't think cutting Marlon Humphrey is going to solve a lot of problems, you know. So I could see us getting a guy like Lattimore, which obviously really bolsters the secondary this year right now, but more importantly, keeps our secondary strong next year regardless. You know, we can decide, do we let Lattimore go? Do we let Stevens hit free agency? There's decisions that are to be made there. I'll be honest, this move to me makes sense from a money standpoint, but not as much of a roster standpoint or even help that we need right now. I think pass rush answers way more questions, but I did just want to highlight it. And then on the other side of the ball, I think the only position that we'd really entertain right now trading for is another wide receiver, just because of the depth, just because of how top heavy we are. Do we need a wide receiver right now? No. But if Bateman or Zay have any injuries for the rest of the season, we're going to be wishing we had one. So that's why I keep bringing that up. That's why I brought Hopkins up last week. I thought that was a low-risk move. You know, you give up a 4th-round pick. The Titans are paying most of the contract. You're just not tied to him at all. You know, it's basically a 4th-round pick to get Hopkins this year, and there's no consequence besides that pick. But a player that might be available in a move that makes sense for the Ravens is Cooper Kupp from the Rams. I think that he would provide another element to the Ravens receiving core, and he's great at blocking, he's great at route running, he's great at catching, he's a dog, he already plays like a Raven. His contract is also in the same family as Marshon Lattimore, where the rest of that contract is not guaranteed. You can move those numbers around, you can get out of it and release him and just kind of have him as a rental option. And I don't think he would cost a really high draft pick. I think the rumors are that the Rams are asking for a 2nd. They probably end up taking a 3rd then. So you give up a 3rd for Cooper Kupp, and you can extend him a year or two, shift his numbers around, and you got Cooper Kupp the next 2 years or so. So if we want to bolster the receiving room and add ridiculous depth there, I think Cooper Kupp's the best option. He's also a ridiculously good blocker. He's just a great football player, man. That is a type of football player that every team would want. And I think Cooper Kupp would work perfectly on the Ravens. I don't see us doing it probably. I think if I had to predict where we're going with this trade, it's got to be a pass rusher. But I wanted to cover a lot of different options in this episode and just kind of discuss in a little bit more detail who makes sense or who I would like to see in a Ravens uniform. The trade deadline is November 5th. The Ravens have made a trade most years that Eric DeCosta has been our GM, so I would expect some kind of move. I don't think that the Ravens are just going to stay put. From a play standpoint, our defense has the most to improve right now. You know, they're the team's weakness, but not really on paper, not from a roster standpoint. The team's pretty full and the defense is stacked and has a ton of money invested into it. So it's not like we're not putting a lot of resources to the defense. They're just not executing at the level they should be. So they might just bank on that turning around. I've heard Kyle Hamilton and Kyle Van Noy and a lot of guys speak on it even this week, saying that they expect this defense to get rolling. You know, they know what they're capable of. They know that they're not playing up to their standard or what their potential should be, and they expect it to turn around fast. So they might just bank on that, but I think that going and getting a dominant pass rusher is going to change this defense entirely and therefore make us equally as dominant on offense and defense, which I think makes us an unstoppable team. Because right now, the only weakness of the Baltimore Ravens is that teams can put up some points on us. So our offense kind of has to keep scoring well over 30 to win these games. And that is not a recipe for sustained success. We're definitely going to lose some more games when our offense just stalls a couple drives and our defense is consistently getting scored on. You can't win like that long term. So do I have confidence that our defense can turn it around as well? Yes, I do. I really do, man. There's too much talent. And a lot of these guys played last year. We had the number one defense in the NFL. It wasn't even close. So it's not like this defense can't get to a level that's better than where they're at right now. They definitely can. And the offense is rolling at an all-time level right now. So we'll see what happens over the next days and weeks. November 5th is the final day that the Ravens will be able to make a trade. But that's it for today, guys. Let me know who you guys would want to trade for, who might make sense for the Ravens. Who do you think the Ravens would go trade for? I appreciate you guys tuning in to another episode of the Flock Rundown. Have a beautiful rest of your day, and I'll let the greatest linebacker in the history of the game take us out.
Ravens Flock. The Flock Rundown is the place to be. My man Ryan has been a lifelong Ravens fan since he was born. The Flock Rundown. Nothing gets better than waking up and wondering how high we can fly. Tune in.
Motionless brainwaves attempt to swim their way to sense, can't tame the untamed.